On this episode of Two Parents and a Microphone.
You're going to fail 100% of the time if you're trying to be someone else.
It's a lot easier to redeem an event as opposed to try and redeem the whole being of who you are. There's always going to be something for you to compare to, especially nowadays when there is so much information available to us.
Two parents and a microphone. Two parents and a microphone. Two parents and a microphone.
Welcome to Two Parents.
And a microphone.
We're the two parents,
And that is the microphone.
which pretty much sums up our qualifications.
That's it. We are two parents and we got a microphone.
And you have this podcast.
That's right. And we are here for season 2.
Season 2. If you missed season 1, go and check it out. There's 8 episodes for you to check out.
That's right. You don't have to stop this video to go watch them to catch up because they're all different, have nothing to do with this one. But speaking of this one, Shante, why don't you tell them what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so today we are talking about this idea of feeling like we're failing in the parenting journey.
Which if you're a parent, you feel like you're failing a whole lot.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, really true.
Yeah. So
I know that we have felt like we're failing. And there is like 4 things that we figured out that'll help us or has helped us get through that.
right.
And the first one is going to be that we separate our identity from our feeling,
That's right. That's
right?
kinda
And we'll
hard.
talk about that a little bit more. We're going to just give you these 4. The second one is holding space, knowing that you're not your kid's be all end all.
Once again, that's kind of hard too.
Yeah. Number 3, stop comparing. Easy?
So very hard.
Okay. And then number 4, that we're going to stand firm on our values while protecting the relationship.
Yeah, that's super duper easy.
Really easy, really
I'm
easy.
just kidding. That's another hard one.
Yeah, so 4 things that
Yeah.
could be very difficult, but we are advocates that say parenting is, it's tough,
That's right. Parenting's hard.
but it is so worth it in the end. And I mean, in the day-to-day, I probably shouldn't just say in the end. I mean,
Yeah.
it is definitely
Lots of rewards
worth it.
along the way as well too.
Absolutely. So let's talk about number 1,
Number 1.
to separate yourself from the feeling.
Right.
What does that mean?
That means worry about more of who you are as opposed to just what you do. kind of
Right.
thing.
So if you feel like you're failing, what we're trying to say here is don't label yourself as a failure.
Yeah.
One of the big reasons is that when we label ourselves, somehow we start believing that we're just intrinsically this way, that we're designed this way, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yep.
But when we can separate that, then we can begin to identify that feeling, do something about the feeling, because we can
Yes.
change choices, we can change feelings, but a lot of times we feel like we're stuck and we can't change who we are. And so we just
Correct.
want to separate that.
Yep.
And also I would say speak some truth into that, because feeling like I'm failing is much different than actually failing.
I mean, also too, worrying about the action versus the character and who you are. Focusing on the action, it can allow you to continue to move forward.
Right.
I know a
yeah.
lot of times when you are worried about, oh man, I can't believe I messed up. I'm such a bad parent. And all those thoughts, it can start to feel real heavy. And you don't want to push forward. You don't want to continue. You don't want to circle back, things like that, because you're just so bogged down in that feeling of, I'm such a bad parent because of this one instance.
Right. And so then if we just go, hey, I did this thing, I can go, like we talked about in season 1, I can circle back, because there's a lot of times we found that we were very wrong, or maybe we just missed it, and we had to circle back and tell our kids, hey, like, we are sorry, we shouldn't have done this, or like we've reconsidered some things, or whatever it might be.
Yep.
And it's a lot easier when you don't take on that identity.
Correct.
Right.
Because it's a lot easier to redeem an event as opposed to try and redeem the whole being of who you are. in a sense.
That's a great point. It's a lot easier to redeem an event
Right.
than trying to redeem the whole being of who you are. That is a really
Correct.
good point.
Correct.
Now, there's sometimes, we're admitting there's sometimes that we do fail
Yeah.
and we have to circle back. But sometimes those feelings of failure aren't really accurate.
Yeah. Correct.
And I think that leads us into point number 2, holding that space where you know that you're not your child's be all end all.
Right.
And really what that
Right.
kind of encompasses is this idea that everything my child does is not in a direct reflection of me. And that is both things that we would say are good and things that we would say are maybe unhealthy.
Yeah.
So that could be their healthy habits, their unhealthy habits, but everything they do is not a direct reflection of me.
Right. Yeah, and you have to be able to allow other people to speak into them and not let that reflect on you. Well, if someone else is speaking into their lives, that means I have failed in some way because I am the only person that can speak into their lives or encourage them or push them or anything like that. You got to allow others in there. And it's something that I definitely struggle with because, our kids are teenagers or adult people or whatever we said on one of our other ones. And as they were younger, of course, you're the coolest person in the whole world.
Right.
But then as they start getting older, other people are kind of cool.
Right.
Other people have funny jokes. And then, of course, you're just not as funny as you used to be, even though you didn't really change anything.
Right.
And it was hard for me to kind of make that transition.
Right. Yeah.
But it's easier if you know it's coming. So know it's coming and know that it's totally okay to have other people, being able to speak in your child's life and things like that, and know that it doesn't mean that you're a failure or all of a sudden you're not funny or cool or whatever.
Right, and that is very true. So you do have to have space for those healthy influences. But the truth is sometimes there's unhealthy influences as well. And we cannot always determine what our child is taking in and how they're going to respond to that. And I mean, we can go as far as, let's just say infancy. That baby may be crying and crying and crying, and you feel like a failure. I mean, I went through a phase where I couldn't nurse. And I felt like my body is not doing what it needs to do, so I am failing as a parent.
Yeah.
But really, that wasn't the case. That was an obstacle in front of us. And when these babies are crying, or they're hungry, or their tummy hurts, or whatever it might be, like that's not a direct reflection on who you are as a parent. I mean, we just believe that we're doing the best that we can.
Yeah.
And then you could just move on into those toddler years, and they're having a tantrum. Well. We watch a lot of reels on Instagram, just kind of figuring out what are people dealing with, how are people handling things. And there's all these funny reels about the silly things toddlers are crying about, you know. There was one the other day, and I'll link to it as well, but she was talking about how her kid was crying because the mommy had 2 chins and the daughter only had 1. I mean, so what I'm trying to say, whether that's the toddler pitching a tantrum or a preteen or a teen beginning to follow some influences of their peers. Like, did you teach them an alternative?
Right.
Probably so, but they're choosing something different, and that is not always connected to you.
Right. And because another thing, as they do get older and they do become teenagers and they do start to mature, they start to have their own identities.
Right.
And they're not going to take on every single characteristic of you as they grow up. They're going to become their own being because that's who God has created them to be.
Right.
You said it before, God has not created them to be an exact clone of you.
Right.
And sometimes that's hard.
Yeah.
Some of their values may not line up with yours. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that those values are always going to be there. Sometimes they're just kind of trying out what works for them, what they feel is valuable, and sometimes they will come back to some of your values that you have.
Right.
But you have to be able to kind of let that go.
Right.
And realize that doesn't mean it's not a direct reflection on you. It doesn't mean that you failed as a parent because they're not exactly identical to who you are as a person.
Right. Exactly. And then number 3, stop comparing.
Yes.
And I think sometimes that is the greatest source of us feeling like we're failing because we're looking at what this family's doing and what the appearance on the outside looks like is they've got it all together. Their kids love game time.
Oh yeah.
They get in the car with a no fuss. They're eating healthy. They're taking great vacations. And so we're going over here, and it might be a family that have a lot more children than us, and we have a couple kids, and we're like, how are they doing it? How are they succeeding? And so that constant intake of comparing yourself to someone else is going to set you up to feel like you're a failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will 100% keep you down because you're always chasing after something.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'm failing now. Well, let me do this. And of course, then that fad is going to change.
Right, exactly.
And then there's going to be another thing that's going to come up that's
Right.
really popular that people are doing.
Right.
And then that family may not be doing that anymore. And it's
Right.
like, well, I thought that was the thing for me to do.
Right.
Because there's always going to be something for you to compare to, especially nowadays when there is so much information available to us.
Yeah.
You're always going to find something to compare to, and it's always going to change.
Right, and I think that we actually are going to probably hit that this season. I mean, this idea of insta-parenting, because that's really what it is.
Yeah.
It is a feed for us to kind of gag ourselves on in comparison.
Yep.
And one thing that I always advocated for is us as parents knowing our children very well, and even being a student of our children, but also kind of that direction that's forming them. And that's something that is set for your home, for your children, and not the rest of the world. So it's like, pay attention to what's going on in your garden, work your garden, and not worrying about what somebody else is growing across the street.
Yep.
And not with this idea that we can't get input or insight from other people.
No.
There's a difference when
absolutely.
we get input, insight from other people to help us do the work that we know we're supposed to do, to raise the family we're supposed to raise.
Yes.
But I think where it really kills us is when we are trying to be another family.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Yeah, because when you feel like it's helping you improve what you're already doing, I think that's a good thing.
Right.
That's something that says, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is going to help me do that better.
Yes.
That's 100%. I don't think that's comparison at all.
Right. Or if you've identified that there is a real struggle or an area that you truly are failing in, like getting some help that's going to come around and support you with the mindset of, hey, we're doing this for your family, your values, and not just trying to change you into someone else. I think that's a huge, huge point.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I mean, it can be this vicious cycle because, like we said, parenting is hard. And sometimes you just need a break. You need an escape. And social media is a great, easy thing for you. And then you find yourself comparing to a bunch of other people, which makes parenting even harder. So then you go back and you try and correct all the things that you've tried to compare yourself to. And then when that doesn't work, it's like, well, I need another escape. And then it's just this ongoing thing that can happen and can keep you in this loop.
I'm going to be really vulnerable for a moment and say, as we started this podcast, I did start following other parenting just sites and accounts. And there's some good stuff out there about how we nurture our children and heal ourselves. But there's some things out there that, even though maybe they are good, they really have caused me to compare what I've done in the past, or go back and live in regret, or go, oh man, like I didn't get, when I cut their sandwich in triangles instead of, rectangles, and they were pitching a fit, like
totally
I didn't use the proper thing. I didn't validate their emotions. And so I'm a lot of times going, oh my goodness, like I really messed this up. I can't even believe my kids are standing. And so that's, I mean, like, it's not that we don't struggle with these things. It's that we know the right thing to do, and we're working to do that. And we understand, because we've been brought down so much by comparison, to stop comparing. Like, it's hindering us, so stop doing it.
Yes, absolutely. You'll feel yourself a lot lighter. You feel yourself actually winning, in a sense, and parenting into yourself, because if you have nothing to compare to, you're always doing well and you're improving and all that stuff. Right.
Yeah. And that's not to say, like, hey, we're going to live just in this little bubble and be unaware and not want to grow and develop.
That doesn't mean don't have accountability or don't have people that can speak into your life and things like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. But just this standing back, watching others, and then going, oh man, they're doing that and I'm doing this. Oh boy.
Then you don't create a steady environment either, because you're always shifting. You're always shifting, and that's not helpful. I think that's going to take us to point number 4 about holding our values, like staying firm on our values while also protecting the relationship.
Right.
And just to bounce back on comparison, if we're comparing to everybody else, then we really aren't going to be able to hold firm on our values, because everybody else ain't going to have our values.
We're holding on to everyone else's values.
Yeah. And that's that thing, like when we talk about values, it's like, what do we value in our lives.
Yes.
What behaviors do we value in our home?
Yep.
You know, whether that's work ethic, honesty, generosity.
Yeah.
You know, there's gratitude. There's a lot of things that basically you can rally around as a family.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, some families value sports. Like they feel like teams are something that gives a lot of good to their children. Some value music.
Yep.
Some value reading.
Right.
Some are okay with sitting around a TV, and some are like, we're not having a TV in our home.
Yep.
And we're not here to judge what you value and how you're going to set up your home. But what we're saying is you've got to know who you've been called to be, because like we said, in comparison, it's not going to work, because honestly, you're going to fail 100% of the time if you're trying to be someone else.
Right. Absolutely.
So you're always going to fail.
Yes.
But so you've got to know who you were called to be, who you are as a parent, and then who this child is that's kind of been gifted to you for you to help develop for, you know, a few years. And then you just have to stand firm on those.
Yes. You have to be able to stand even though others may not be standing with you.
Right.
And that's hard.
That is very difficult because sometimes
hard.
the world looks like way against you.
Yeah.
There's a couple things. I mean, I can just say, like, in our family that we have said, like, hey, we value these things. Generosity is number one. And there's a way that we live our life that is different, that way that we can be generous. You know, we don't drive new cars. We don't have car payments. I've predominantly been in the home with our children, so we've had one income for a long time.
Yep.
And we made some sacrifices so that we could still be generous while keeping, you know, a comfortable lifestyle, but we were still able to be generous. So that's the thing that we value, that you and I both are like, we're not moving on this. Generosity is a value.
And there were some times when our kids didn't quite understand that.
Right. And we did try to bring them in. And it's just like, we are going to be a generous family. And some of it does impact them because, like I said, there were sacrifices we made. So if we weren't rolling up in the latest model car, we would have to remind them, hey, this is because we value some things differently. And that's not to say anything bad. Like, there are people that drive the latest cars and they give 10 times more than we could ever give. But it was what we could do with the resources that we had. Right. And therefore, I mean, we had to let our kids in on this. Like, this is what we value. Yeah. And if we're going to value this, we're going to have to say no to some things. And some of those things were like maybe having some materials that other people had. Yep. And we were okay with that. So we always stood firm on that. Another thing that we valued was conversation, like running to conflict. Yes. And this is where I go back to understanding that you and your child are different. So valuing running to conflict in our home wasn't always comfortable for everybody in our house. Right. Now, for me, I had worked through all of this and I knew how to run to conflict, and conflict is resolve, and conflict, you know, resolving conflict means peace to me. But that wasn't always comfortable. Correct. And so as our kids grow up, they might look at that and do that differently. But for us, as parents, we're going to value running to conflict and trying to resolve it. Right. Right. And then I want to talk about a big one, because it is kind of these boundary ideas that we're about to go into, is the way that we handle our resources and the resources we allow our kids to use. Right. So we've always been of this mindset of, if we're providing it, then one, there is going to be some level of responsibility that you have to that and to us. Right. But also, if we're providing something for you, we want to make sure that it's not hindering you. Correct. And whether that is video game time or a phone or a car or food or whatever it might be, sports, like, if what we're providing begins to hinder you or hurt you, then we're going to reevaluate what we're providing. Right, right. Because then the resource is not doing what it's supposed to do. Because we've looked at our resources for our children and for anybody that we provide them for. Right. We looked at it as something that is there to help you. Yes. We've always wanted to invest, and we always wanted to help get them to, you know, reach their goals and dreams and things like that. But if that resource is doing the opposite, we have to reevaluate being able to continue to put that resource in there. Right, absolutely. And that's a hard one, because that's going to rub up against sometimes their happiness.
Right.
And I saw this, the parenting reel I was talking about, but I came across this lady. Her name is Keli Reese, and I'm going to link to her as well. But she was kind of talking about this idea of, she has 5 children, 5 different sports. So, I mean, their family values activity,
teams,
you know,
stuff like that.
and then this child was like, no, I don't feel like going today. It's break, right? And mom was like, no, you're going to go. So I think on top of valuing the activity, they probably also value doing what you have committed to do.
Right.
And so she's like, no, you're going to go. And this child then says, well, I forgot, I didn't bring my bag. Not I forgot, I don't have my bag. And so she tells the child, well, it looks like you're going to have to go tell your coach that you didn't bring your bag and you're going to sit there. And so mom says the child gets out of the car, but she begins to feel icky. You know, that same thing we're talking about, failing. What did I do? Was that, you know, wasn't I gentle enough? Did I not have enough mercy?
You feel that judgment.
Right, because now my child is kind of hurt and they don't agree with what I said. And so should I change it? And so she said she went to go home to get the bag. And then on the way home, she was like, no, I'm not going to do this. There was a deliberate action and it requires a consequence.
Yeah.
And she made this statement about how as parents that we want to keep our kids healthy, happy, and whole. And that's a good thing. That's a human thing. She said, but sometimes when we hold our boundaries, it rubs up against their happiness.
Right.
We confuse it as it rubbing up against their wholeness. And those are 2 different things.
That's true.
Because happiness, that really isn't our job to keep them happy when they're outside of a boundary, right? When they're outside of a value. So our job is to hold those values, hold those boundaries, while trying to preserve the relationship. So that comes to this conflict where we can feel like a failure. My boundary made you unhappy, and we want a relationship, and I want you to keep you happy because that's how we have good relationship. And now I've done it, and I feel like a failure.
Right.
So Chris, like, in those times, because there have been a lot of times that we've held boundaries and the kids were not happy, how do we preserve the relationship?
Well, I think one, you know, one of our values has been conversation.
Yes.
So that's been a big thing, is having those conversations, even though it may feel tense, even though it may feel uncomfortable, is still having those conversations with them, not just throwing it down and walking away and you know, doing whatever. It is having those conversations. But I think also there is a level of almost prioritizing, you know, the whole healthy, happy deal. Because, I mean, you want them whole to begin with. That's kind of the most important thing.
That's what you're parenting towards. The whole,
correct. The whole person that gets to go out and eventually leave your house and, you know, change the world.
Yes.
It's kind of the way we viewed it, in a sense. And then of course, if they're whole, you also want them to be healthy. That's kind of the next thing, because if they're healthy, they're gonna, you know, continue to be whole. They're not gonna hurt themselves and things like that. And then of course, happiness is it's kind of like on the lower end of that, because, you know, being whole and healthy doesn't always mean you're going to be happy.
Right.
Because sometimes being healthy means you're going to have to make some choices that you may not be happy with.
Right.
But it's going to lead to joy, because I think that's one of the things is we've kind of looked at joy is a little bit above happiness. Happiness can be kind of come and go.
Right. It can be circumstantial.
Correct. We want them to have, you know, an overall joy with life.
Yeah.
And that comes with being, you know, happy, or
sometimes doing the hard work too.
Correct. Yeah. Being whole and healthy. Sometimes that doesn't always mean you're going to be happy. Right. Because you're going to have to sacrifice. You're going to have to give up some things. You're going to have to push through some things and be uncomfortable. And that's not always, that happiness is not always tied with that. Right, because
when we're talking about that as a feeling, so it's like, I mean, a lot of time, I mean, honestly, when we're trying to get our bodies in shape and, you know, in the gym, and I, you know, don't always like the exercise. Right. I'm not happy. Right. But there is something that I know that it's going to produce, and it is going to be a lasting return. And I think that's the way I look at those boundaries is, okay, I know this didn't make you happy, but I feel like it's for your good. But I will say that you have been better at going, no, we need to hold the boundary. I have been more of the one okay, I'm fighting for the relationship. And I think it's been a good balance
Mm-hmm.
because I do believe that sometimes fighting for the relationship means that we are
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to have a conversation, hear
Yeah.
their side, and that we don't always have to be rigid. So I don't think it's being rigid.
Sure.
But like you said, that conversation is circling back to them and going, hey, I know this doesn't feel good right now.
Mm-hmm.
I just want you to understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
And assure them that you love them.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't still make them happy sometimes. Sometimes it annoys them.
Correct.
Right? And I think that still is you holding the boundary, but you fighting for the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this idea of being steady earlier. Like if we're comparing, you're going to be up
Yeah.
and down and not steady. I think that's another way to preserve the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
When we hold the boundaries.
Yep.
And we constantly hold them and we say, these are our values.
Mm-hmm.
And we're constantly fulfilling those
Yeah.
values. It helps them, even if it doesn't work in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
eventually they're going to say, or they're going to see that wasn't against them.
Yeah.
Like they didn't do that to hurt me.
Yeah.
They did that to help me, and they actually provided something
Mhm.
steady.
Right.
Like they were people of their word.
Right.
They acted on what they said.
Mm-hmm.
They stood for something.
Yeah. And sometimes that is not going to come right away.
Right.
Sometimes it could be
doesn't-
years down the road that
Right.
they come to realize those things.
Yeah.
And that's why having those values is so important, because sometimes those are going to be like your tent pole, your tent peg that keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
Because if it is other things, external things that are going to change, you're just going to be flapping in the wind, because it's just going to be, well, okay, I need to hold on to this. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay, I need to hold on to this. Okay, that didn't work. It's going to be this constant thing. Whereas those
Our
values
yeah.
are what can hold you steady to know that, eventually you're going to come to a place where they are happy.
Right.
Because that's another thing, is happiness isn't a constant.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a constant. I don't think if it's a constant, I don't know if you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've looked at it kind of that way, I think, as well too, where there's going to be some times when you're not going to be happy, and that's okay.
Right. Well, and I think I like what you said about it being the tent peg, like the thing that is kind of holding you steady is those values, because all these outside forces are going to come.
Right.
Excuse me. But that idea is your child's emotions can also be those outside forces.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
those values give you something to reevaluate of, am I going to stay grounded in this? Is this worth it? But I know we also talked about this idea of a lot of that conversation about keeping them happy and also maintaining the relationship applied probably to some older kids. But I want to back it up and talk about maybe the younger kids too. And I think it's the same thing, but maybe it's not always a conversation, but it's that reassurance of love.
Yeah.
So if a child had to be separated from you in order to just reset, or they were doing something and it's like, okay, we're not going to do this in this space, and you had to remove them for a moment, or they cried because they didn't get their way, there is always still that circle back of reassuring of love, that connection, you're reconnecting with them. And when you show yourself steady in love, whether it is that physical love, you're able to love on a toddler, an elementary student, or showing up even though that kid wasn't happy with you. Like when they're older, I showed up to your game, I showed up to your performance, I'm still talking to you, I'm making you dinner, I'm smiling when I'm around you, I'm treating you with respect. That preserves the relationship. A lot of that is on us as parents, because remember, they're not responding to us right now because they're not happy, they're not responding in a joyful relational way. But we can remind them, we're here, we're steady, we love you. And we still might not get the response we want. And that goes back to holding space to know that everything that your child does is not a direct reflection of you. Because you could be putting in all the love, and they might be in a space right now where they're not receiving it, or they're not processing it the way that you're bringing it. So I think that's a really, really big thing. It's like, you're going to continue to do the thing, but they may not always receive it. And in that situation, I mean, all we can really do is stand. And just stand and continue to be there.
And that's where those values come in. It is
They help us to stand.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. They
Sometimes
give us something to stand on.
they're just holding you up because
Yeah.
parenting is just hard, and you're just kind of leaning up against.
Yeah, you have to go back and go, okay,
All right.
I did this because I really do believe in this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, it hurts, but I really do believe in this, and so I'm
Yeah.
going to keep showing up and I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And that is it. So, I mean, we're just going to recap.
Yep.
If you feel like you're failing as a parent,
Yep.
number one,
Yeah.
I want you to separate the feeling from the identity. So you're not a failure. You may feel like you're failing, and then you can just kind of go in and say, am I really failing, or do I just feel like it because of some of the other things going on in life?
And you may have done things, you may have failed in a sense and done things that weren't right.
Yep.
And that's okay. Just remember, those are events. They're not identities.
Right. So we want to separate the feeling from the identity. The second one is we're going to hold space, knowing that we're not the be-all, end-all in our child's life, meaning everything they do is not a direct reflection of us.
Right.
They are their own person, and we do have to hold that space, that
Right.
we're a person and they're a person, and there is going to be some space between that.
And them getting things from others, encouraging things like that, is not because of anything that you may be lacking.
Exactly. And the third one, stop comparing.
Stop it. Just stop it.
I think we're gonna just talk about that in another episode, but because there's so much to it. But just stop comparing, and if you find yourself comparing, like just reshift back to, okay, what are we doing in my home and my family? Who am I as a parent? Because I'm gonna fail 100% of the time that I try to be someone else.
100%.
And then the last one is stand firm with your boundaries while preserving the relationship. That's really important, because sometimes we can be real rigid and stand firm, but then we've lost the relationship, and then what's the point?
Yeah.
You know, what's the point? So relationship is always king. I mean, we say that, we've said that as we've done ministry, as we have friends in our family. Relationship is king. Like we will always fight for relationship, but we can't let go of our values.
Correct.
So hold those values while preserving the relationship.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think that's it. If you guys think of anything or have any questions or anything, comments, join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you, hear your thoughts, all that stuff, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram,
Facebook.
We're on Spotify as well too.
Yeah.
Anywhere you get your podcasts.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear from you. And if anything else.
I think that's it. Just hopefully this has helped you when you're feeling like you're failing, because it's going to happen.
That's right.
Join us in the conversation. Let us know what you think, and we would love to connect with you.
All right. Cue the theme music.
Two parents and a microphone.